Never shall innocent blood be shed. Yet the blood of the wicked shall flow like a river. The three shall spread their blackened wings and be the vengeful striking hammer of God. You people have been chosen to reveal our existence to the world. You will witness what happens here today, and you will tell of it later. All eyes to the front. You must watch, dear. It'll all be over soon.
Now you will receive us! We do not ask for your poor or your hungry. We do not want your tired and sick.
It is your corrupt we claim.
It is your evil that will be sought by us.
With every breath, we shall hunt them down.
Each day, we will spill their blood till it rains down from the skies.
Do not kill, do not rape, do not steal. These are principles which every man of every faith can embrace.
These are not polite suggestions. These are codes of behavior. And those of you that ignore them will pay the dearest cost.
There are varying degrees of evil. We urge you lesser forms of filth, not to push the bounds and cross over into true corruption, into our domain.
For if you do, one day you will look behind you and you will see we three. And on that day, you will reap it.
And we will send you to whatever God you wish.
And shepherds we shall be, for thee, my lord, for thee. Power hath descended forth from thy hand. May swiftly carry out thy command. So we shall flow river forth to thee, and teeming with souls shall it ever be.
In nomine Patri.
Et Filii, Spiritus Sancti. How far are we going to take this star?
The question is not how far. The question is, do you possess the Constitution, the depth of faith to go as far as is needed?
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're listening in to us today at the Resurgence of Sanity, and also welcome to those on Plutarch's wife's channel, Elena Barr's Fitness. She willingly gave up her time slot for us today, guys, Miss Secretary. So thank you. We have a special guest today, Dr. Stephen Baskerville. Dr. Baskerville, who are you? Where do you come from? What do you do?
Well, I'll be glad to answer that, but I'd like to ask you first before we do. That introduction was extremely disturbing. May I ask what that's about?
That is from a movie called The Boondock Saints. So that they do the prayer. They are cleaning up the streets of Boston, Massachusetts. From this movie was made in the 90s, and it kind of a callback to the 70s and 80s era of that city, which was kind of not a nice place to be.
Hmm. May I ask why what the relevance of that is to our subject matter? I found it very disturbing. Are you advocating violence?
Nick, you want to take that?
Oh, absolutely not. No. But there's three of us here. There's an old man, and there's two of us, similar age. And while we're by no means advocating violence at all, yet it's a popular movie. It resonates with people towards our age. It's a desire to hold people accountable for basic moral actions, even though the vigilantism is by all means condemned by us. Absolutely.
I'm just curious why you would show something like that without condemning it, because I didn't hear any condemnation of it.
Okay.
I mean, I hope that I'm not going to be asked to, to condone, like you say, vigilantism or violence.
Absolutely. No, we condemn it all the time
here. Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, all right. I teach political science this is what I've done most of my career. I'm an academic. I teach politics. I got involved in men's issues about 30 years ago when I wrote a book about divorce, my first book on this topic, taken into custody. And it was about the divorce courts, the injustices of the divorce courts and the divorce industry generally. It's got chapters on the legal system, on the feminism. It's not a legal manual. It's not an advice book. It's not a how-to book. It's a book about politics, the politics behind the divorce industry, and what it is that makes the divorce industry tick, what makes it operate the way it does. So it was an attempt at an expose of the injustices in the family court, which in those days was not well known. As much as it is today. So I tried to expose it and describe it and document it as clearly as possible and make it clear exactly what was going on and what is going on still in the family courts and in the divorce machinery. Because I find that even today, when there's much more awareness about these injustices, there's still a kind of lack of understanding of just how serious they are. I mean, it's almost become a cliche. You hear these cliches about, dads get a raw deal or dads get stiffed in the family courts or it's unfair to men. And a lot of these descriptions, I think, understate the matter very seriously. They make it sound like it's just, a playground where, a bunch of children are shouting unfair, unfair at one another. It's much more serious than that. We're talking about serious violations of the Constitution and basic civil liberties, which I can detail if you want. I've done it in other videos. So that was my first attempt to write about these things from a professional politics viewpoint. I then did another book called The New Politics of Sex. I found that what was going on in the family courts and the divorce machinery was only a small part of many other injustices that were taking place primarily at the instigation of feminist ideology, the main targets of which were mostly men, but they were also many other people suffer. Women, children also suffer from the injustices that are perpetrated by the machinery that has politicized sexuality and politicized sex. And then I wrote a book just a couple of years ago, which tries to extrapolate even further, expand out further in scope, and show why the impact that this has, these injustices and the corruption that takes place in the courts and in the machinery of government, having to do with men and with feminist ideology, why this is having a much larger impact throughout the American and Western political system. In other words, for example, the corruption of the courts by the divorce system is having an impact on corrupting the courts elsewhere as well. The Me Too and these other kind of things. Once the courts are corrupt, they will not target only the reason for their initial corruption. They will target anybody that they want. So it's not just men and in divorces that are suffering injustices of the courts. It's the entire American judiciary that has become highly corrupt. You can't contain injustices. You can't quarantine injustices in one place. As Martin Luther King used to say, an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So you can't just quarantine the injustices in the family courts. It's going to spread out to other courts, criminal courts, probate courts, civil courts. And other people are going to, once you establish the precedents, once you establish the corrupt practices in one sector of the judiciary, they're going to be taken up and practiced by other sectors of the judiciary. And not just the judiciary, they're going to be taken up and practiced by other parts of the government, sectors of government as well, the legislative and the executive and the bureaucratic and so forth. So, this is an attempt to, issue a wake-up call in the first instance to men and to fathers and to those who are involved in divorce machinery, but also to all citizens in the first of all, in the United States, but also throughout the Western world.
So basically what you're saying is that we talk about this you talk about this in your books. You talk about the deep state. The original deep state was the welfare state, which kind of got taken over by also the Great Society, which got thrown into the whole family court system, a whole set of precedents that eviscerated civil liberties, or natural rights, you could even say, due process proceedings in the family court. And this has essentially given precedent for other parts of our government as well, and also inflated the machinery.
Right. That's very true. Yes, exactly. You touched several things there. If I can just extrapolate on them a little bit. When the feminists got the vote in the early 20th century, the first thing they did, everybody makes a big deal about the feminists and the vote, and everybody makes a big deal about abortion and about, affirmative action and women moving into the workplace. These weren't the devastating things. These weren't the really destructive. The first thing the feminists did when they got the vote in the early 20th century was to create the welfare state. And the welfare state was a completely new departure for government, the purpose of government. It meant that the government wasn't just concerned with protecting us. It was now concerned with providing for a certain sector of the citizenry, namely the poor. And it started out as, when the government gives, the government also takes away. Giving to the poor, giving handouts, welfare payments to the poor also allowed the government to demand control over the families of the poor. And of course, once they got control over the families of the poor, the first thing they did was destroy those families. So the welfare state was the beginning of it in many ways. It was the first big feminist achievement in expanding the power of the state And the first victims of that were low-income families, and especially minorities in the inner cities, African Americans especially, but there wasn't, they're the most visible perhaps. And, Black communities in the inner cities became ghettos, became dangerous, welfare's combat zones because of the welfare system. But it wasn't just them. I mean, it also happened in rural Appalachia among white families, although they got a lot less publicity about that. But yeah, the welfare state targeted the poor. The poor were the first victims because the poor can't fight back. Low-income people generally don't have the affluence. They often don't have the education. They don't have the knowledge of their rights as citizens. So they were bribed, basically, especially low-income women, were bribed with welfare payments into turning their families over to the control of government functionaries, government bureaucrats in the welfare state, who actually, by the way, were also, for the most part, increasingly women over the decades, feminist women. So the welfare state was the first way that the feminist ideologues were able to wheedle their way into control of the private lives, into the family lives, and above all, control of the children of low-income American citizens. This happened gradually over the course of several decades. It really got a huge infusion of power in the 1960s with the Great Society programs of Johnson and the anti-poverty programs that developed in those years when welfare was hugely expanded, and the welfare functionaries were politicized increasingly with feminist ideology, and their ideology, their anti-male ideology of the feminist left, dovetailed very nicely with the bureaucratic self-interest of the welfare state functionaries. In other words, and basically what this meant was marginalizing fathers, marginalizing low-income fathers, throwing fathers out of their homes as a condition for the mothers to receive welfare payments. As I say, just to make that a little clearer, what I just said, the fathers were it was in the bureaucratic self-interest of the welfare state bureaucrats, functionaries, to get rid of the fathers and take control of families.
Became unnecessary.
Right, but also because those functionaries were feminists, they also ideologically didn't like fathers to begin with. So it worked very well to get rid of the fathers and turn the mothers into clients of the bureaucracy of the state with the welfare payments. Well, this continued onward for a number of Republicans, conservatives raised some objection to it, but eventually they gave up for a variety of reasons. And it was really in the 1980s, the 1990s, that the welfare system, this machinery that was created in the welfare system, was expanded. And by the way, this is where things like the welfare system, the feminists gradually, through the welfare system, gradually were also acquiring police powers, which at first only had the jurisdiction over low-income families. And among those police powers was child support enforcement. They were allowed to, confiscate the incomes of the low-income men, the fathers, putatively, who were supposedly fathering all these children. So they got the police powers to get control of their incomes. The other way that they got police powers was through child abuse accusations, because most child abuse takes place in low-income families, in single mother homes. So the feminist social workers got the power to enforce child abuse. At first, they claimed that the child abuse was perpetrated by the fathers. This was not true, and they knew very well it was not true. Very little child abuse is perpetrated by fathers. It was perpetrated entirely by single mothers. And so because of this, the child abuse programs were working against single motherhood. So they were kind of counterproductive from the feminist point of view. So increasing the other way that the feminists got police powers, even more effective for them, was domestic violence accusations. And these were used mostly against fathers, against men. And they were used to further remove the fathers from the home. And again, domestic violence tends to take place more in low-income families. So they put in place this machinery, this quasi-police powers to extract child support, to police child abuse accusations, and to police domestic violence accusations. And in the 1980s, really starting in the late 70s, but especially in the 80s and really in the 90s is when this took off, they expanded this machinery not just from welfare families, but to middle-class families of divorce. In other words, the divorce machinery started using the welfare machinery to first of all, to collect child support, even though most divorced fathers paid their child support quite willingly and without much problem. And also they expanded it to accusations against middle-class fathers of domestic violence, first of all, of child abuse, even though it quickly became apparent that middle-class fathers, divorced fathers, were not guilty of very much child abuse. So they then also expanded the domestic violence machinery to use that against the middle-class fathers as well. So the feminists acquired these police powers. The social workers became de facto plainclothes police, but they weren't constrained by the rules that we usually require police to observe, uniformed policemen.
Kind of reminds me of Communist Party members.
Yeah, very much so. The secret police, yeah, the bureaucratic police. Yeah, like the NKVD or the KGB. That's very much what they were. They were political police, politicized police, armed not with communist ideology, but increasingly over the decades, with feminist ideology. And it was in the 90s that they started to expand, and it worked so well, this expansion of police powers to the social workers, the feminist social workers, that it worked so well in getting rid of unwanted men, getting rid of unwanted fathers. That's basically what it was. Throwing the fathers out of the family, getting control of the children, getting control of the mothers too, for that matter. And it worked so effectively at getting rid of the fathers that they started using it in other ways to get rid of other unwanted men. And this is where the Me Too came from, which is another way of getting rid of unwanted men using criminal accusations, starting out with something fairly innocuous sounding like sexual harassment, but later on, expanded to rape accusations and sexual assault and other forms of other gender crimes that were used against middle-class men or against any men. Well, it was pioneered also, for example, rape accusations were also pioneered mostly against low-income men, but they were expanded to military men, soldiers, sailors, airmen in the military courts, and they were expanded to university students, university men, through these campus tribunals that became well known. So they launched rape accusations against university students, but they weren't adjudicated in regular courts where the students would get the benefit of due process of law. They were adjudicated by these campus tribunals, in which the juries consisted of other students or professors or university administrators. In other words, they were kangaroo courts, and so this was expanded to these accusations, and then it was expanded to where they found that this was a good way to get rid of unwanted politicians, male politicians, like Donald Trump, and who's that Supreme Court nominee?
Kavanaugh.
Kavanaugh. And so they started using this, and of course, people like Bill Cosby and the Prince of York. So they started using these accusations to get rid of any kind of unwanted men. So that's what I mean when I say that the injustices that were pioneered in the family courts and before that in the welfare system were not quarantined there. They were not confined to those venues. They were gradually expanded out and used against others. So this is how the feminist gendarmerie, it's basically what it is a feminist gendarmerie, grew up in the welfare system, in the family courts, in the university courts, so-called courts, in the military courts, and from there into the criminal courts as well.
I can tell you it's not just limited there. It's also, you find it in the church courts too.
And in the church, yeah.
I've had to encounter it in the church courts. So I was a Orthodox Presbyterian church pastor who got falsely accused of domestic violence while I was getting beaten, by the way. Then guess what? The police come in. Oh, she accused you, so therefore you're guilty. We're going to take you away. And took my kids 1,000 miles away. You probably heard my story. Took my kids 1,000 miles away. I was basically, according to historical law, that's kidnapping.
Yeah.
That's kidnapping. It's false accusations. And by the way, I was a pastor, and then I get thrown into also the divorce machinery with the quasi police powers, and I have all these social workers, child support people, judges, all making me out to be this terrible person because I dare to believe what the Bible says, and I'm not an ally to feminists. And in fact, the reason I have it stated in my court case, the reason I lost custody, because they had to get the kids away from this misogynist because of my religious misogynist beliefs, just being a historical Christian.
Yeah, no, well, a couple points important there. First of all, your use of the term judiciary, kidnapping is not hyperbole at all. The first chapter of my book on this topic, Taken into Custody, that's the one. The first chapter of that book is called Judicial Kidnapping. And that's exactly what it is, because of no-fault divorce, you don't have to have done anything legally wrong, nothing criminally wrong or even civilly wrong. You don't even have to have agreed to a divorce. A divorce can be inflicted upon you involuntarily, unilaterally, by your wife, and then your children are taken from you through literally no fault of your own, no legal fault of your own, and then your property is taken from you. Your so-called child support is confiscated from you. You can be removed from your home. And so it is exactly what it is. It's legalized judicial kidnapping, perpetrated by the very same judges and legal machinery, judicial personnel that are supposed to be protecting our rights, our civil rights, our constitutional freedoms. They're the ones that are violating our constitutional freedoms. It's a classic example of the fox, or perhaps a better term is the weasels, guarding the hen house. So it's precisely what it is a form of judicial kidnapping. And as you say, this whole entourage of this machinery of functionaries, lawyers, in some cases legislators as well are involved in it, and executive figures are all getting their noses in the trough. They all get benefits from it, if nothing else, their own salaries and their own employment. Although sometimes
Title
they get
4D.
Yeah, and sometimes they get more than that. The judges' salaries are paid by child support money and so forth, and the court's operating expenses. So no, the whole system is just rife with conflicts of interest, with ethical improprieties, with constitutional rights. In fact, in the second chapter of that same book, I go down the Bill of Rights. I go through the entire Constitution, and I show how every point in the Bill of Rights and other articles of the Constitution are routinely violated by the family courts and by connected agencies every day on a routine basis, including, as you say, something as basic, for example, I won't go through it all right now unless you want to get into it, but something as basic as freedom of speech or freedom of religion. That's just one example. You say that your religion, your Christian faith was used as a way, as an excuse, as a pretext for taking away your children because your religious beliefs made you a misogynist. Well, this is obviously an ideological term. It's an obvious interference with your freedom of belief, your freedom of speech, your freedom of religion. And yet this happens. This is one example of many of how the most basic civil liberties, constitutional rights, and protections are violated every day by these courts.
Professor Baskerville, I have a question for you. You mentioned that that they were able to take these operations from their original use in the feminists and in the child support courts and expand them. And you mentioned that it worked very well. Do you have any thoughts on why it worked so well? Like we're just, no one had seen it before, didn't know what it was,
Good, very good question. Yeah. And that a very important question. That's part of it. People didn't recognize feminist ideology, and they still don't in some ways. They call it cultural Marxism, which is a term I don't like very much. I used to like it, but I don't anymore. They want to fight They want to fight the last war. They want to fight the wars of yesteryear. Feminist ideology over the last half century or so has gradually displaced Marxist ideology, liberal ideology, socialist ideology. That dominated the left for many years. Gradually, over the last few decades, it's been displaced by feminist ideology, and conservatives especially didn't recognize this. They didn't see this coming, and they still don't. They want to keep fighting socialism. They want to keep fighting the Cold War. They want to keep fighting communism. Communism is dead. Communism is not the enemy anymore. Communism has been displaced and replaced by feminist ideology, which is a completely different ideology in many ways. It's got roots in Marxism, but it's different, and it needs to be confronted and assessed on its own terms. So that was the part of it, is that all of us, many people, didn't understand what had taken place and what was coming, but especially the conservatives. And this is the big answer to your question. The big answer to your question is the lack of opposition, the failure of conservatives, the right, who should be the natural opponents of feminism. They're the ones that we would expect to fight back against it, and yet they have not done this at all. And I would say there's several reasons for this. One is what I already mentioned, that their failure to understand that a new ideology had come about and had appeared on the scene, and they didn't know how to deal with it. Another one is that feminism tends to neuter its own opposition. There's a great tendency among those on the right to want to play the white knight, as they call it. They want to be chivalrous. If they hear that a woman is being victimized by a man, either in a divorce court or domestic violence or whatever, it doesn't matter if it's true. The initial impulse of many traditional, especially establishment conservatives, those in the big conservative, NGOs and think tanks and pressure groups, and the Republican Party especially, they want to play the white knight. They want to play the chivalrous knight coming to the rescue of the damsel in distress. And they don't want to hear complaints from men about violations of their civil rights or constitutional rights. They instinctively take the side of feminism. They don't see themselves. They don't describe it as taking the side of feminism, but that's in effect what they do. They take the side of the woman, even if the woman is being driven by feminism. And a number of people have described this as the white knight phenomenon. There's an excellent new book by David Edgington who points this out in The Church. You might consider having him on the show. David Edgington.
Had him on.
You did have him on. Okay, it's called What's it called? White Knights and Reviling Wives. Excellent book. I'm just reading it now, and I plan to have him on my own show. And then you also get some others like Peter Wright and Paul Elam call this gynocentrism, and they're right about this. They trace it back to the Middle Ages, and there's some truth in that. It's not entirely the explanation for the origins of feminism, but it is the explanation, I think, for a parallel development to feminism, and that is the this right wing desire to play the hero, to play the white knight, the chivalrous knight in shining armor. So that the right, the conservative establishment has just fallen on its face. as far as opposing feminism. In fact, in many instances they've actually promoted feminism, and some examples of that is they will, if there's a squabble between the feminists, the so-called moderate feminists and the extreme feminists, or between the feminists and the homosexualists and the transgenderists, then the conservatives will take the side of the feminists. They'll take sides within this intramural, internal squabble among the feminist left, the sexual left, and they'll take the side of the feminists against the homosexualists and the transgenderists. A good example of that is women's sports. This idea that when homosexual transgenderists assert the right of so-called trans women, in other words, men dressed in dresses, men dressed like women, to participate in sports. The conservatives say, well, this is outrageous. This is an affront to women, and so they will cast themselves in the role of the white knight coming to the rescue of women who've been victimized because men are participating in the women's sports. Now, if you look at who was it that all the transgenderists are doing in this is taking the logic of feminism to its logical conclusion. Who was it that said that gender differences are socially constructed? Who was it that said that sex differences are artificial? It was the feminists that invented this, right? Yes. Exactly. And now the transgenderists are just using it against them. They're just saying, well, okay, if there's no difference between men and women, if sex differences are just artificially constructed, then you should have no objection to us participating in women's sports, even though we have we still have a penis. And so, and the conservatives, instead of standing up and saying, plague on both your houses, we don't care about your silly squabble, and standing up for some articulating some kind of fixed principles of their own, they simply wheel on the latest feminist onto stage, and they endorse her, let her speak about, attack the transgenderists, and she'll of course use the opportunity to attack misogyny and sexism and tell us all why we're racists and sexists and so forth. So here, what's going on here is the right wing, the establishment conservatives, are helping the feminists. They're pushing the feminist agenda by their own cowardice and their own inability to articulate their own, to stand above the fray and articulate their own principles, fixed principles. Instead, they have wheeling feminists on stage to fight their battles for them. Well, this is obviously unmanly and cowardly. And yet this is precisely what the tradcons do, the traditional conservatives, because they themselves are among the most feminized of men in our society.
So it sounds to me like, in a nutshell, you're saying that feminism co-opted men's desire to protect women.
Very much so. Very much so. Yes, there's a great absence of effective opposition to the feminists for a number of these reasons. The failure to recognize the new ideology, the emasculation of the right, and the desire of the conservatives to play the hero and the knight in shining armor. So these are all reasons why the opposition to feminism has been ineffective. And another reason for the ineffectiveness to feminism is the news blackout, the media blackout against men saying the things that you and I are saying right now. I mean, the things that we're saying on this show. I've been trying to say them for 30 years in the mainstream media. Actually, I flatter myself that I've had more success than any other person in saying. I did get on a couple of big mainstream media shows. I was on O'Reilly twice. I was on a show called Hardball. These were major media, network media shows. I was on a couple other shows, and I did manage to make my pitch on this, but they attacked me They dropped all pretense of objectivity or fairness, and they attacked me while I was stated on air. They interrupted me, and they repeatedly they told the audience I was talking nonsense, and of course what I said had no impact, even though I was on major media. So I guess I'm kind of the exception that proves the rule, that I did manage to get on some major media. I even got an op-ed column in the Washington Post once, but again, it had no impact. So what can you do?
I do want to note that what he's saying, while we were talking particularly about the political side of things, this very much I had to fight this in the ecclesiastical courts as well, or ecclesiastical side of things. While I was in the Orthodox Presbyterian Church, we had this white knighting phenomenon. Like I said, clearly these ladies, they have ladies going on speaking tours, putting books out, promoting, and what is an abomination in the sight of God concerning sexed piety. And a few of us stood up and said, no, this is feminism. And they're using some of this cultural Marxism tactic. I know you don't like that word, but that was the word we were using back then. That was about 2020. And that was the big term right around 2020, 2021. Right. And what happened to those that pointed this out? They used the bureaucratic machine to shut us down. They created all kinds of lies about us, destroyed our reputation, tried to infiltrate our families, to turn our families against us, turned our churches against us, and so we are either silenced by church courts, or we are quickly shown the door in other ways.
Yeah. No, the churches are the most feminized. One of the most feminized institutions in our society, and it's absolutely shocking that feminism has in these churches displaced. It has supplanted the gospel, the Christian gospel, and it's quite amazing how it has done this. Even in the relatively the self-styled conservative traditional churches, for example, a few years ago there was a big controversy about homosexuality in the churches, and in the Episcopal Church, in the Anglican Church, they left. Large numbers of entire congregations left the Episcopal Church and started a new denomination. Still, they call themselves Anglicans in North America, and they started new churches which supposedly were faithful to the Scriptures. And yet, these same churches are just as feminized as the Episcopals. They may not ordain women, but they do allow women to preach. And when the women preach, they invariably preach about domestic violence, and they don't preach the Christian gospel by any means. Whether you believe the Christian gospel or not, that's not what's in the church, in the churches anymore. And typically the typical scenario is a man will get married in the church, consecrated by the pastor, witnessed by the congregation, under the auspices, a sacred covenant. He will then, go on for a few years. His wife will unilaterally divorce him without any grounds, take his children, leave him high and dry, takes half his income as child support or more, throw him out of his home, and he will go to the pastor and say, or the priest, just as bad in the Catholic Church, and he will say, look what happened to me. And the pastor will say, well, I will help you. Maybe I'll say a prayer for you, and I'll help you find a lawyer. And then if the man says, which is what I think he should say, wait a minute, you consecrated this marriage. You called this a sacred covenant before God. You witnessed this before God, and the entire congregation witnessed this before God. Don't you feel any obligation to stand up and speak out against this injustice? And if you say that, a look of terror will come over the pastor's face, or the priest, and he will change the subject, or he will walk away, and he will have nothing to do with you anymore. And I mean, I think this is an unbelievable abdication of responsibility, because we're not just we're not just talking about divorce in some abstract sense. We're talking about divorces that were consecrated within that church by that pastor, that clergyman, witnessed by that congregation in the name of God, using the integrity or the authority of the church. And then to allow the civil authorities to just come along and tear up that sacred covenant. Because the civil authorities don't just tear up the legally binding contract, they also tear up the sacred covenant. And the churches just respond to this desecration of their ordinances or their sacrament, in the case of the Catholic Church, with silence and with obsequiousness and sheepishly, is absolutely the most cowardly thing you can possibly imagine. I think, if you want my opinion, I wrote something about this today because Pearl Davis just did an interview with a Orthodox priest, and he sounded like a very reasonable man until he was forced by her to defend his church's fecklessness when it came to divorce, and he spouted out a bunch of doublespeak. And what I think a clergyman should do, faced with the scenario which I just outlined, which is a very common scenario, I think the priest or pastor should go into the courtroom, demand to be heard, say to the judge, I am an interested party in this. I have standing in this case to be heard. I consecrated this under the authority of my church, witnessed by my congregation. I have a vested interest in seeing that justice be done to all parties concerned. And if you grant this divorce, and if you take away this man's children, and if you throw him out of his home and take his property, you will be creating an injustice, an egregious injustice against not only the law, both the law of God and the law of the land. Okay? And therefore you have no right to do this. And I will not be silent until you administer justice, which you are required to do. And that's not mixing church and state. That's not saying, you, the judge, are required to obey what my church calls a covenant. No, the pastor says to the judge, you are not only violating the law of God, you are also violating the law of the land, the U.S. Constitution or whatever is the law of the land, and you are violating a contract which you are required by law to respect and to uphold. And that's simply saying you are required to uphold justice, and I am required by my calling to see that you uphold justice. And that's not mixing church and state. That's ensuring that justice is respected. And that I think any church, any clergyman that fails to do that is presiding over a false church. He does not have a true church, and he is not a true Christian.
If only I had somebody like that to stand up for me, but
Yeah.
I was the pastor. But what usually happens, though, especially in the religious communities, though, is the women know how to get out of it, so they make an accusation, and the pastor says, well, she accused him of domestic violence.
Right. Well, then the pastor has, again, obligation to go into the church and into the courtroom and say, I want justice done. This man is entitled to due process of law. He's entitled to a jury of his peers. He's entitled to a trial by jury. And if he is guilty, then he should be punished, of course. And if he is innocent, he should be left in peace in his own home with his own children without further interference by the civil authorities. And that's what the pastor should. And imagine if every clergyman in the country did that, there would be the divorce industry would shrivel. It's the fact. What had happened here is the clergy have vacated the turf of family counseling, family pastoral care, and that turf that vacuum that they have left has been filled by lawyers and judges, by the courts. So the churches have vacated their calling, abdicated their calling, vacated their natural turf of the of family, health, family pastoral care of the family, and that turf, that vacuum, has been filled by the legal profession, by the courts and the judiciary. The clergy and the churches are up to their neck in guilt. They are the greatest, the most wicked sinners in the land.
And on that, you talked about a jury and trial. Does this occur in family courts? I know it doesn't, but you want to talk about that and why it doesn't happen?
I've never heard of such a thing. Apparently, there are some jurisdictions where you can demand a jury trial. I don't know about this. I imagine it would be perfunctory, but it may be possible. I don't know. I've never heard of it happening. But this is what it should be. I mean, the Constitution, I believe, as I recall, says in any civil case where the amount at issue is over $20 is entitled to a trial by jury. You are constitutionally entitled to a trial by jury in a divorce, especially if you are, the whole concept of no fault divorce, the very concept of no fault justice is a contradiction in terms. There is no such thing as no fault justice. No fault justice is a prescription for injustice, systematic injustice. And that's what we're seeing. You can't prove no fault because you haven't done anything. You're innocent. Nobody's even claiming you've done anything wrong. Yeah. Sorry.
They claim no fault, but then all the he's a bad man, blah blah blah, is all there waiting for you.
Exactly. They throw the fault out of the front door, but it creeps in by the back door, and it doesn't have to be any kind of legally recognized fault or crime or transgression or violation. It can be anything. He picks his nose. He doesn't wear underwear. I mean, it can be anything you want. The judge can use it as grounds to take his children away, and they use that as grounds to take his income away, and then use that as grounds to take him away. So, that's exactly right. No fault is a sham. Sorry.
I had many others. You might have touched on this. I can't quite recall. The reason why they don't permit juries in family courts is because it could possibly, the populace would know what the shenanigans that are actually going on in the court and could set a precedent that would overturn the whole thing.
Well, that's absolutely right. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I should have mentioned that. The whole purpose of a jury trial is to be judged by a jury of your peers rather than by a member of the legal profession, rather than someone who has a vested interest in your conviction. I mean, any government functionary in the judiciary does, in some sense, have a vested interest in creating as many criminals as possible, as many culpable citizens, and punishing them as possible. So a jury has an incentive, has much more likelihood to be impartial. The other thing about a jury was juries can judge not only the facts of the case, they can judge the law itself. So if the jury thinks that the law is unjust, which no fault laws are inherently unjust, the jury can refuse to convict. They can say, no, we're not going to convict, because not only has this man not done anything legal, committed any legal infraction, he's not even been accused of committing any legal infraction. He's been tried under a no-fault statute, which doesn't even require that he does anything wrong. So we are refusing to honor the plaintiff, the wife's petition, because this man is legally innocent, and because the law itself, under which he is being divorced and in danger of losing his children and home and everything else, is itself unjust and unconstitutional, which of course it is. So that's the other thing about a jury. A jury trial can call into question not just the facts of the case, but the legitimacy and justice and constitutionality of the court of the law itself under which he's being tried.
There's also a couple things that I experienced, touched on them in your book. See, I was the one who actually had to end up filing because the church refused to intervene, and let's just put it, the no contact order was extended basically indefinitely, so I could never really get an answer to what was going on. And meanwhile, I figured out that she was very likely cheating on me. So I said, well, I guess I have to file because she already did the false DV, which was 6 months no contact, right? She can take my kids and I can't have contact. Right. I can't see my kids. Then she did, right before that was expiring, she filed what's the restraining order, right? The temporary was it TRO, temporary restraining order, where therefore you have to go before there's a time where she can accuse you of all these things with no evidence. Then you have to appear before a court. So I was like, well, I guess I've already lost the marriage. I'm endangering losing my kids permanently. So I guess I have to file.
Right. Yeah. The fact that the man files doesn't mean that he's the moving party in the divorce. I mean, if she's taken the children, if she's deserted the marital home, if she's, those are grounds, legitimate grounds for divorce. I mean, if she's abandoned the marriage de facto, and forced the children to out of the home too, then that's legitimate grounds. So yeah, no, it doesn't that doesn't make it that doesn't make the divorce your action. It's still her action, right? And that happens apparently a lot. Sounds like.
So
it's almost. Go ahead, Plutarch.
Well, I was just, so we hear this number thrown around a lot, and that is that women initiate 70% of divorces. Do you think that number is too high or too low based on on your research?
I'm glad you asked that. It's definitely too low. It's not just too low. I mean, it might be accurate that women initiate 70% of divorces, but the important point is how many divorces involving children. When children are involved, how many divorces are filed by the mother? And in my book, I show some evidence, which another scholar took, and I borrowed from him. It's virtually 100%. It's virtually the mother is, if children are involved, the mother is the moving party in virtually 100% of divorces. And again, it might be a situation like Nick described, where she deserts the home and he has to file, but it's still the same point. It's who is the moving party? Who is it that's breaking up the home? It's if there are children there, it's always the mother. And that lawyers will tell you the same thing. Lawyers will tell you that it's virtually, an honest lawyer will tell you it's virtually 100% of the cases is it's the mother who's the moving party in that. So, by the way, I owe that point to the late Robert Seidenberg, who was a friend of mine and wrote an excellent book called The Father's Emergency Guide to Divorce Custody Battle. And he teased that out, that statistic, and I couldn't find any holes in it, so I repeated it in my book, Taken into Custody.
Thank you for the reference. I'll take a look at it.
Yeah, Robert Seidenberg, The Father's Emergency Guide to Divorce Custody Battle. It's got a lot of truth. It's centered on the Washington, D.C., Virginia, and Maryland area, but it's good. It's basically good everywhere.
Yeah. We talked about judicial kidnapping. We talked about some of the processes involved. Is any other the machinery you would like to point out to us before we move on to solutions?
Oh, well, there's a lot of machinery. What have I mentioned? I've mentioned the courts. I've mentioned the judge. I've mentioned the divorce lawyers. Robert Seidenberg, in his, I just mentioned, he calls one of his chapters is titled "Your Lawyer, Your Enemy," because basically the two lawyers often collude with one another to drive up the prices. There's what's called guardians ad litem, which is a third lawyer who supposedly represents the children, but that just drives the prices, the costs higher. There's the psychotherapists almost all the forensic psychotherapists who are brought in to evaluate the parenting skills of, supposedly the parents, even when nobody's ever called into question the parenting skills. And they give the judge always what he wants to hear, which is that the father is a bad father. This is psychotherapy. Forensic psychotherapy is a completely corrupt profession. There's the child support enforcement machinery, which is full of conflicts of interest and violations of the separation of powers. For example, the enforcement agents who are supposed to belong to the executive branch often write the child support regulations, right? They're the ones that decide how much child support you have to pay. So imagine if the police had the power to make the laws. The police make the laws that they enforce. Well, it's a violation of the separation of powers. So that's another one. Just the conflicts of interest are just unbelievable. The legislators are another collusive party. Most lawyers, as you probably know, in America, most legislators and state legislatures are lawyers. They make sure that they get on the judiciary committees so that they can control the appointments of judges, especially in the family courts. And they oftentimes have a role in setting child support guidelines also. So there's more conflicts of interest there. I'm sure others will occur to me. It's just unbelievable how many conflicts of interest there are, and how much the machinery goes on. Oh, the attorneys general, that's a good one. The attorneys general, the prosecutor, the state attorney general is the office that is in charge of maximizing the state's revenue from the states make money. State governments make money off child support enforcement. They rake it in from the federal taxpayers, which is a violation of the federalist principle. And the state attorney general is the one who's in charge of maximizing that revenue. So the state attorney general is a multiply corrupt office because he has an interest in maximizing the number of divorces, maximizing the households without fathers, maximizing the amount of family breakdown. And so a cynical attorney general like Josh Hawley in Missouri, I believe, can write a book about manhood and trumpet his family values and all this, but he's in charge of maximizing child support. Well, the state for Missouri's coffers. Well, Missouri doesn't make any money in its coffers from child support unless there's a lot of divorces, family breakups, fathers separated from their children, and so forth. So, all these Republicans can tout their family values all they want to, but the bread and butter of it is that they have a vested interest in breaking up families. And Josh Hawley is one of the main hypocrites in the United States on that. So it's just unbelievable how shameless these people are in their hypocrisy and in their conflicts of interest.
Sounds very corrupt and shameless. And I guess before we get to solutions, we should talk about not just the machinery, but the actual results of this whole package of this corrupt system of family court, alienating fathers, judicial kidnapping of kids, basically impoverishing the father without due process, with the threat of jail time.
Right. Yeah. Jail time.
What are the effects?
And I would add homelessness after the jail time, after he's finished the jail. Yeah.
He's a recurring. He comes in right before winter every year, I guess, to turn himself in, right?
Yeah, yeah. And once you spend 6 months in the pokey, you're unemployable. You're never going to work again in anything other than a menial job, and so you're basically homeless. And you go to a men's shelter and you talk to the men there. Every one of them will tell you that they went through a divorce. Every one of them, they'll say that. It's common knowledge among them. Yeah, so it's just unbelievable. And yet you get all these organizations claiming, left-wing organizations especially, or libertarian ones, claiming that they are concerned about the homeless and they're going to create another program to help the homeless. And they completely ignore the family courts and how they create the homeless. It's unbelievable. How the political class exploits this for its own purposes. So they make lots of money, they get lots of donations by claiming that they're going to help the homeless. And they don't help the homeless. The homeless are continue year after year because the homeless are created by the family courts.
So they actually end up destroying a whole potential class of citizens that some may be very productive parts of society, and you turn them into a criminal class with nothing to produce for society. So you actually end up depriving your own society of what that decent citizen otherwise could have produced.
Right, very much so. And by the way, you say you said that it creates a criminal class. It does create a criminal class, and it creates a criminal class in two ways, both by criminalization and by actual criminality. Because all these fatherless homes that started in the ghettos and things of the American cities, they produce real criminals, the juvenile delinquents, the fatherless adolescents who are the most prone to crime. In fact, they're almost the only people that are prone to crime are adolescent boys who grow up without fathers. So they're created through actual criminality, but then the fathers are criminalized by child support bills and by other things connected with the court. So they criminalize the men both through real criminality and through criminalization. And then the latest thing they're trying to do is criminalize the police, who are trying to make sense of all this, keep order amid all this. Policemen like what's his name, Chauvin, the guy who was arrested for the George Floyd thing. Because the feminist social workers, they want to be the police. They don't want real policemen with uniforms who are who have to observe due process of law. They want to be the police. They want the feminist gendarmerie who isn't constrained by any need to observe due process. So they criminalize the adolescent boys, they criminalize the grown men, the fathers, and nowadays they're criminalizing the policemen as well. So it's just a formula for criminalizing men.
And a lot of the policemen have gone through the same machinery themselves.
Exactly. Yes, they have. That's right. And if they're accused of domestic violence, they're not allowed to carry a gun. So even if it's just accused, not convicted, not convicted in any way, just accused of domestic violence, then they can't carry a gun anymore, which means obviously they can't do their job. So it's just the whole thing is designed to destroy men.
So it destroys men, it destroys their children, and also the higher proclivity to, because they don't have a father in the home, to commit crime themselves.
Right. And other social pathologies, substance abuse, truancy, dropping out of school. You name it. Virtually every social pathology is connected with fatherlessness, not with race, not with poverty, with fatherlessness. And all kinds of personal pathologies too, like things like obesity, smoking, drug use, you name it. They're all connected with fatherlessness. If you don't have a grown man there to guide you, to encourage you, and to enforce the rules if necessary, then there's no rules. And that's what happens in most of these cases, in many of these cases.
What are some of the broader implications that this has for society as a whole, you would say?
Well, they're pretty big. One is, the social destructiveness, the destructiveness of the inner cities, the crime, substance abuse, truancy, and the welfare communities. This has been going on for decades, but now it's spread to middle-class communities. Middle-class adolescents are also susceptible. Middle-class white adolescents, I emphasize, are also, if they grow up fatherless, also tend to these social pathologies. So there's the the social destructiveness. There's the breakdown of the family, which I think needs no further elucidation. I mean, if you no-fault divorce, if you make divorce on demand without, never deny it, that there's that. There's the complete corruption, degeneracy of the judiciary. I mean, a society without a country without a judiciary it cannot be a democracy. It can't be a liberal democracy. If there's no protection for the Constitution, no protection for individual freedom, no protection for individual rights, if the Constitution, if the judiciary is debased, which it is, then you're going to see lawfare operations like we saw against Donald Trump, lawfare operations like we saw against the January 6th defendants, the ordinary American citizens who were guilty of nothing but going to the inauguration, to Trump's inauguration, and then being lured into the Capitol building, where most of them didn't commit any crime, but where they were, incarcerated, for which they were incarcerated. So this lawfare operations is unbelievable. How it's, debased the judiciary and politicized the judiciary. So,
you talk about this in your book, Who Lost America? Why the United States went, quote unquote, communist and what to do about it.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I talk about that quite a lot. So it's the degeneracy of the whole republic and of other Western countries is just mind blowing. I even go into a chapter in that book, and I do on my previous book, The New Politics of Sex, about how even things like foreign affairs and international affairs are taken over by sexual radicalism. How the feminists have taken over foreign policy, so that the United States State Department and the Defense Department, the military, they promote divorce overseas. They promote family breakdown in places like the United Nations. The United Nations is completely run by feminists who spend most of their time, destroying families. Aid, government, economic aid programs, anti-poverty programs in the United Nations operate just like domestic welfare does. They give money in so-called development aid. They give it to mothers. They give it directly to the women, usually on the pretext of on the precondition that they marginalize the men, throw the men out of the home. So aid programs, developmental aid, economic aid is basically a form of international welfare. Wars like the war in, perhaps the most prominent, the war in Afghanistan, were justified, rationalized by protecting women from so-called abuse by Muslims, which people like Karen Strahan have shown to be greatly exaggerated. It's even the foreign policy machinery of the United States, the European Union, the international organizations like the UN, all of these things are now controlled increasingly by sexual radicals, especially feminists. So, and you name it. I mean, AIDS programs seem designed to create as much AIDS as possible. Sex education is promoted by the United Nations, and sex education doesn't just teach techniques of sexual technique of how to have sex. They also inculcate feminist ideology, gender ideology on children around the world. So you name it. It's infiltrated and infected. It's wheedled its way into every sector of government power, both local and national and international as well.
Well, what can we do about it?
Well, good question. I
Any
think we can do a lot, actually. I think there is a lot we can do. And it takes some thinking about. I in my first book, In Taken into Custody, I offered some solutions for the purely for the divorce within the context of divorce and the family courts. And basically, I argued, I did not argue in favor of 50-50 shared parenting. I argued that legally innocent parents should be left alone in peace in their own homes with their own children, and without any further government interference. So I argued that no-fault divorce was unconstitutional and should be abolished. And basically, I've come increasingly to the conclusion that that would solve most of the other problems associated with family breakdown and feminist ideology. And I take this from a book, a brilliant book, by an academic who served as my mentor on this, the late Daniel Amneas, who wrote a great book called The Case for Father Custody. And in that book, Amneas argues, and he argues very convincingly, that the linchpin, he calls it, the linchpin of the feminist ideology, the linchpin of the feminist agenda, the linchpin of feminist power, all feminist power, is mother custody following divorce. In other words, female control of the reproductive system. This is what he says, this is the basic principle that all feminism is about, is female control of the reproductive system. So if you break that power, if you give control of the reproductive system to men, to fathers, or you even allow them to share in it on an equal basis, you will break the power of the entire feminist lobby. And it's very difficult to convince people of this. It's not an easy thing to see, but I'm increasingly convinced that Amneas was right, that he was right about this, that this is the central injustice, this is the central failure. The welfare system, and then later the no-fault divorce system. Both of these were brought in without any argument, without any opposition, without any pushback from conservatives. And those are the two things those are the two biggest pillars of the feminist power: the welfare state and the no-fault divorce machinery. These are the two things that transferred control over the reproduction, transferred the future from men to women. As the poem goes, no, I've forgotten the poem. What is the poem? The hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world. The hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world. I forget the name of the poet. It was an English poet who wrote that.
I heard it. I don't know who wrote it.
Yeah, I forgot his name now offhand. But it's true. It's very true. So I'm not saying that other reforms aren't needed. That feminism doesn't need other reforms. That other reforms aren't needed in the family courts, in the military, and the universities. All of those, there are other reforms that are needed. But I think those other reforms would happen. I think they would be made possible. I think they would be ancillary, and they would follow much more easily and much more logically if you first break the power of the system of automatic mother custody in welfare and in divorce. You break that power, and the other reforms would follow logically without very much opposition. I firmly believe that, and I don't see any. If you want a panacea, if you want one single thing to concentrate on, that would be my suggestion. Concentrate on that. Break the power of mother custody. Amneas called it father custody. You don't have to call it. That's a provocative way of putting it. But it would be custody for the parent that stays with the marriage, and that's, as I said earlier, the father virtually 100% of the time.
Assumed father custody.
So it's basically the same thing. Yeah, truly abolishing no-fault divorce and abolishing no-fault divorce in custody decisions as well basically amounts to father custody. It's basically the same thing. Because as we said earlier, divorces involving children are are instigated almost entirely by mothers, by virtually 100% of the time. And there's almost never any legally recognized grounds. So if you consider that the mother is instigating no-fault divorces virtually 100% of the time, and you abolish no-fault divorce, then you're going to end up with father custody. But the magic, the beauty of father custody or abolishing no-fault divorce is that it's not going to mean that fathers are going to be raising children as single fathers instead of mothers raising them as single mothers. That's not what's going to happen. What's going to happen is that divorces are going to dry up. The divorces aren't going to happen. The mothers aren't going to leave. They're going to stay there because they know they can't.
Consequences.
They know the consequences. They know if they leave, they'll lose their children. They're going to stay in the marriage unless they have very serious grounds for divorce. And then you can have you can have a fault-based divorce because that's what grounds are all about. So, father custody isn't going to create a lot of single fathers replacing the single mothers. That's not the consequence. The consequence is that the groundless divorces, the no-fault divorces are going to essentially disappear. And the mothers are going to learn to live, to honor the vows that they took and take responsibility for their actions and live with the consequences of the marriage they entered into and make the best of it, which is what people did for millennia before feminism came along.
And one of your ways to get at this, you've mentioned a marriage strike.
Yes, now that's a very interesting thing. This is something I believe that this has huge potential, because when you ask me, the next logical question would be, how do you call for father custody? You call for abolition of no-fault divorce. How do you do it? Where do you no legislature is going to pass it. Well, no, perhaps not now, but the leverage comes from the marriage strike. The marriage strike is something that Helen Smith documented more than 10 years ago in her book of that title, The Marriage Strike. No, Men on Strike, that's the title, Men on Strike. And she showed that men were refusing to marry because they were becoming aware of the injustices that confronted them in the family courts, in the divorce courts. And she also showed that women were upset about this. That most women want to have families. They want to marry men. They want to get married. They want to have, families with a man. So basically, my argument is, okay, fine. If they want this, then they've got to join the men. They've got to come along with the men, join the ranks of the men, and say, if you want men to marry, because the men want to marry also. Most men want families. Most men want wives and children and families. So everybody will be much happier if we just joined the men and the women together and call on the legislators to abolish this no-fault divorce nonsense, institute custody for the parent that remains with the family, usually the father, sometimes not, and make it clear that if you leave a marriage, you leave it with the clothes on your back, and you walk out you know where the door is. You leave the marriage with the clothes on your back, but you don't take the children with you. You leave the children in the home with the spouse that is faithful to the marriage. And and I think the marriage strike, the MGTOW as it's called, men going their own way, I don't endorse this as a lifestyle. I think it's tragic. I think it's sad that men have to go without having wives and families. But if you do it as a leverage, like any strike, a strike should be a means to an end. It shouldn't be an end in itself. It should be a means to an end. So if men use the marriage strike, use the MGTOW movement as leverage to change the divorce laws, then they will be doing something truly constructive and truly beneficial for not only themselves, but the entire society.
So, Professor Baskerville, I've been tracking this, and the data says that men are going on strike, and the response that I've been tracking is primarily from the tradcons, And their argument is, but we need men to come together so that we can have more babies, right? And I'm looking at this going, my read on the data says that the left is almost like, we know that they're antagonistic to men, but it's the tradcons who more recently have really come out against this idea of a marriage strike. Why? Because you can't have babies without a marriage in their world. So, well, men should get married so that we can have babies to fix the birth rate crisis. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's unbelievably. I mean, the tradcons are either monumentally disingenuous or monumentally stupid. I tend to think it's the first, but it could be an element of the second as well. Fine, they're right about the birth rate. They're right about we need men to marry. We need to get the birth rate up. We need men to marry. We need to have families. The men want to marry. The women want to marry. Just change the divorce laws, and men will marry. Make the divorce laws constitutional. I don't want to say fair. I want to say just and constitutional. And the men will marry again. I guarantee it. But the tradcons don't want to do this because they and their friends have an interest. I'm sorry, but they have too many friends. I think they have too many friends in the divorce industry. There's too many conservative Republican lawyers who run the Republican Party, who also are making money off divorce, like Josh Hawley, for example. So unfortunately, the tradcons are horribly hypocritical and disingenuous and self-interested, and fairly stupid as well. When you hear someone like Tucker Carlson coming out with this nonsense, it's really unbelievably disappointing because he's not stupid.
Well,
but you're right. I mean, it's a very simple solution for the tradcons. But where are their NGOs? Where's Heritage? Where's Focus on the Family? Where's the Family Research Council? Where's the Republican Party? Where's the Claremont Institute? Where are these think tanks and NGOs and pressure groups and think tanks? They're holding endless conventions and parties and conferences and dinners and feathering their own nest and getting wealthy, losing all their battles. Why don't they come out for this? They're feckless. They're utterly feckless.
Well, I just brought it up because I wanted people to understand the scope of what we're dealing with. Yeah. There are not many allies for men out there, and organizations that will help push this.
Good point. And that you're right. And therefore the solution is what the solution is always for men. You've got to take the initiative. You cannot rely on anyone else. You've got to, I mean, you do have to man up. You have to be a man and take the initiative yourself. Doesn't mean you have to get married. You don't have to be a man, follow the tradcons, but you have to be a man. You have to stand up for your principles and you have to take the initiative. A man is a community leader, after all, a citizen, and speak out against these injustices. Try to enlist the women. Because after all, once you get the women on your side, I think the laws might change fairly quickly. Actually, the legislators tend to listen to the women, and just tell the women if you want men to marry, if you want children, if you want babies, and you want men to marry, then you've got to help us change the laws. Simple as that. So
to back up what you're saying, one thing I've been noticing is there's the immigration debate going on in the U.S. And as soon as the mothers found out that their kids were not going to get the jobs that the mothers put their kids through college for and sacrificed for, the mothers soured on immigration. And now it's a big fight. And now politicians are listening. Yeah. No, that's very true. It's very true. No, I think once the women mobilize against the divorce machinery, I think we'd have the battle won. I think we would. I don't think they could stand against that. So the men have got to enlist the women, and so I would not. I would. I wouldn't end all interaction with women, but I would do it in such a way that you're showing your leadership as a citizen and as a civic leader, and make it very clear to the women. Yeah, I'd love to marry you. You're beautiful. You're
you're stimulating, you're everything a man could want, but I'm not going to marry you as long as the laws are like this. Simple as that. I'm not a fool. And the men have got to, the men have got to take the initiative. And if it means a generation or two of men have got to go without marriage, well, I hate to say it, but they're doing it. They're doing it anyway. It's not like the MGTOW men, the men on strike, are sacrificing something. They're doing this spontaneously. They're not. I'm just saying, yes, I can understand why you're doing it spontaneously, and I'm not trying to talk you out of it. To the MGTOW men, I'm telling them, channel your the leverage that you get from the marriage strike, channel this into constructive change, and use because it gives you power. It gives you enormous power, and you have a responsibility to yourself and to if you want children, and to the society, to use that leverage, to use that power that you get from your marriage strike, to use it for constructive purposes. Otherwise, it's just a tragedy. Otherwise, it's just, you sit in your parents' basement and play video games, and that's, they're right. That's not an existence.
Dark, did you have anything else you wanted to say?
Nope.
Questions?
We're good.
Okay. Well, Dr. Baskerville, we thankful for having you on. Could you tell us where the audience could follow you or purchase any of your books?
Yeah. First of all, let me thank you for having me on. The questions were very intelligent, perceptive, and exactly the right ones. They can get a hold of me at my website, stephenbaskerville.com, Stephen with a PH. That has my books and my major articles, my most important articles. But there's also a link there on the website to my Substack. And on my Substack, they will find my most recent articles. I've been using Substack much more recently, both for my published articles and for posts. So they'll find my most recent work on my Substack, which is linked from my webpage, stephenbaskerville.com.
Any other final thoughts, gentlemen?
God bless you for what you're doing. It is precisely the biggest hope we have of anything like I'm suggesting getting done is the alternative media, like what you're doing. I mean, this is the greatest power we have, is to bypass the mainstream media, even bypass a lot of the alternative media, and get this message out. So, this is precisely what needs to be done.
Dark, anything?
No, I just want to say thank you for your time. It was a great conversation, and I personally enjoy talking with intelligent people, and I know Nick does too. So it was great to have you on.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, guys, with that, thanks you all for listening, and we will see you next time.